I see you found our little hiding spot in the universe. Don't get too comfortable. This is a place where you will find those with an experience that's out of this world, or possibly deep within your life. I welcome you to the Oracles with James Tyson. Lean forward and listen. We will pull you into a supernatural journey with guests from around the world, each one experiencing some of the most extraordinary phenomena this wee planet has to offer. Now, here are the Oracles with James Tyson.
Thank you, Liam, and thank you, listener, for tuning in to today's episode of The Oracles with James Tyson. It's me, James, and today we're going to talk near-death experiences with the Reverend Peter Panagore. We're talking to him about his book that he's written about his near-death experience, Heaven is Beautiful, How Dying Taught Me That Death is Just the Beginning. We're also going to dig in a little bit further. The book is about one of his near-death experiences. He's had another since his first one. We're also going to go back as far as when he was 5 years old and had an encounter with an angelic being, which kind of put him on a spiritual path from there. Of course, we're going to talk what it was like on the other side. He talks about going to hell, but not really going to hell, but it's a hell of his own making. He describes a lot of what he sees on the other side, which is fascinating because, again, if you know people who've had near-death experiences, a lot of them have a cloudy memory of what was going on the other side. There are a few people like Peter who actually have a detailed memory of what happened to them, and just in those minutes of death. See, back in the winter of 1980, Peter was a college senior and went ice climbing here in Canada, kind of a world-famous Weeping Wall, or actually the lower Weeping Wall, along the Ice Fields Parkway in Alberta. And again, it's in Alberta, Canada, for those of you who, for some reason, have no idea where Alberta is. His climbing partner at the time was a very experienced ice climber. Peter was a novice, and on their descent, they became trapped on the side of a mountain. Now, just imagine as the sun set, Peter was overcome by the exhaustion of the trek itself and hypothermia. He died on the side of that mountain back in March of 1980. And in his minutes on the other side, Peter experienced hell, forgiveness, and unconditional love. Peter reports heaven was beautiful, and he didn't really want to come back, but had the choice. And we're going to talk about that choice and how it was presented to him. His near-death experience obviously changed his life and resulted in an intense spiritual journey that continues to this day. Peter is a retired, he was a pastor for 18 years. He still does counseling. An avid sailor, expert skier, obviously, loves going in the woods and runs and trails. He's got a BA in English from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, a master's in divinity from Yale Divinity School with a focus on systematic theology and Christian mysticism. So yeah, it's kind of a mysticky kind of background. So it's fascinating what his near-death experience, or where his near-death experience took him. And his education background and his 30 years of yoga and meditative practice and his work as a pastor with the dying and grieving has given him a unique insight and a language and perspective on heaven, God, death, love, life, beauty, and hope. He's a retired pastor and has written a number of things and was a writer for the Huffington Post. He lives out in coastal Maine with his wife, and he's got grandkids, and he lives almost about as far as you can get from me, from one coast to the other. I'm going to go get him now. You're going to like the wonderful Reverend Peter Panagore. Peter, how are you today?
Hi, James. How are you? I'm great.
Excellent. I am well here on the Pacific left coast. And are you out in Maine?
I'm about as far from you on the continent as it's possible to get, because I'm right on the edge of Maine in the North Atlantic.
Yeah. I've been almost there. I've been to Halifax, Nova Scotia, and a little bit south of there, but that's about as far east as I've been on the continent. That would be the farthest
It is. Well, that was totally a U.S. thing for me to say, ignoring the fact that Halifax is east of us, and I am not as far away from you on the continent as I can be.
Yeah.
Sorry, Canadian friends.
Or
I guess it was.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
I like that. I've got some friends in Rhode Island and Massachusetts, and I really want to go out there. My friend Brittany actually puts on historical tours of the harbors and ships and things like that. So now I want to go out and poke around in all the history that's there. My family on my mother's side showed up in Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1628.
Well, that's a while ago.
I tease some of my American friends about being more American than they are.
You can't get much more American than just following the Pilgrims into Massachusetts.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, and I've always been told at least they weren't the Pilgrims, but they were semi-pilgrims. They were still people out looking for a new life and things. And half of them, a bunch of them actually, how they got to Canada is they were United Empire Loyalists that went north. During the Revolution, and the rest of them fought in the Revolution. So that was kind of interesting. They're on two different sides. So
well, it's possible that our families knew each other. I had family come in the 1630s to Connecticut, and although it was a long way from Boston, when you're walking or on horseback, sort of the same economic refugees looking for a new life.
Exactly. What were their last names?
Baldwin, Baldwin.
Ours were Center. They left, I think they had an S in Center when they left the UK and they got to the Americas, and they had put a C in front of it. I don't know when the C came in. It may have been later in the late 1700s, or in the 1700s. They spelled it with a C instead of an S. But, or heck, that might have been the family that moved to Canada and they threw a C on it. Who knows? That was us. But enough about history. Enough about you.
It is.
Now let's stick with you. Peter, when did this whole, I almost said woo-woo side of you, the whole spiritual side, this opening happened in your life?
Well, it started when I was about 5 years old, and I told my mom, and she listened to me, and I realized after my conversation with my mom, and I'll tell you a little story in a second, that I better keep my mouth shut about it. So what happened was, I was about 5 years old, and I went into the side yard and climbed my maple tree and went up a couple of branches with my mom's permission. And as I sat in the tree, in a flash of unexpected inspiration, I use all the language I use when I talk about this kind of stuff as metaphor. So an intelligence, an angel of the divine came and told me inside myself, as I was stretched outside myself, to see a glimpse of oneness, that I belonged to God and that I would work for God. And it was this huge explosion inside me of joy. And so I jumped down out of the tree, and I went and I told my mom, and my mom said to me, being a Catholic, since you woke up the baby, my little brother, you're going to have to learn to dust and iron and sweep and sew and vacuum and cook, because nobody's going to be there to do it for you, and you can begin right now with. And she handed me a spray can and a cloth, and I had to, as punishment for waking up my brother, clean the dining room table. And I realized that when I said it to her, it didn't at all contain what the experience was. And so shortly thereafter, I had a out-of-body experience, wakening from sleep, and encountered who I later described, and a good Catholic boy from Boston, didn't know anything about Hinduism, but it sure looked like Ganesh to me in later life as I looked back on it. And I fell into the eye and the mind of Ganesh and experienced compassion and wisdom and understanding beyond my comprehension. And when I was out of my body and looking at my physical form on the bed, I completely understood that my physical form was not me. And that began my long journey. And it continued on from there with visions hiking on the Appalachian Trail, which the year before I died. And then when I died, ice climbing in Alberta, snow caving in British Columbia, ice climbing in Alberta in 1980, it kind of skyrocketed me off in a deep mystical life and changed everything about me.
Take me back to that event that you had in the Ice Fields Parkway up in Canada. Obviously, obviously it's an accident, but it walk me through the feeling and the perceptions that you have or had at the time.
During the long traumatic run up to my death, or during when I was dead, or after? Well,
when you say long traumatic run to your death, was there an event, an adrenaline building event that led to your death, or was it very quickly? Did you fall and die, or
no
process?
It wasn't adrenaline, and it wasn't quick. It was hypothermia, and it all came as a result of making a youthful bravado choice to make my first ice climb. And I was a mountaineer, backpacker, winter camper, snow caver. My first ice climb with one ice axe and an ice hammer instead of two ice axes. And my climbing partner was a lead trained, certified climber, and we together, both youthful people in our early 20s, "Oh, sure, right, you can do that, Peter," I said to myself, and he agreed. And so what happened was it slowed our climb down. It's this place called the Ice Fields Parkway, as you mentioned. There's right next to the Saskatchewan River, there's a mountain called Cirrus Mountain at a location called Weeping Wall, for your friends who are in Alberta. And by the time we reached the top of the climb, because I was slow, the sun set, and all the other teams that were climbing that day left. And so it was this long, agonizing understanding that we were in a precarious death situation, and hypothermia started immediately and set in and got deeper all night long until I died, some hours before sunup. So it was a slow trauma, involved a lot of willpower to drive ourselves, Tim and me both, forward for survival, because I was on the National Ski Patrol at that time as a college student in Bridger Bowl, a ski resort in Montana, and been treating people for hypothermia and frostbite through the winter, and knew what the symptoms were intimately, and knew that we were immediately in trouble. And as soon as the sun went down, temperature dropped about 30 degrees. I started getting what I call the cart clattering jaw, where in the cartoon the jaw starts to my whole body was this massive quiver of muscles twitching, that I was uncontrollable shivering, that was trying to keep my body trying to keep my body warm. And Tim hauled up the rope. We knew we were in trouble. Tim hauled up the rope. It became a huge knot. The sun went down, the moon didn't rise, the stars were out. We could see sort of in gray and white, and I had to take off my gloves to untangle the knot. It all took hours. The whole thing, it took hours and hours of the inner drive, to the will to survive, knowing that if we didn't get off the mountain, we were going to die. And if we stayed on the mountain, we were going to die. And the only chance we had was to, in the dark, drive ourselves forward to self-rescue. And it took hours and hours and hours. And as this progressed, the cold entered in deeply into my brain, all parts of my body, but into my brain, as is the case with people who freeze to death. And it made me less capable cognitively. I became less able to process information as the night went on. And Tim was in the same boat. And so, long story short, and it's in a book, and it's all over the web and YouTube. It's long story short. By the time we reached the last rappel, 100, 150 feet up, My feet were frozen like blocks of ice, and my hands were frostbitten. All my nose had frostbite, my cheeks and my chin, and we were going to make the last rappel, and I tied the rope to my harness and tossed off the other end of the rope in order to pull it through the ring that was 150 feet above us, and the rope jammed. And when the rope jammed, it was desperate. We knew that unless I got the rope free, we were going to die. And as hours went by and I couldn't get it free, I progressed through the final stages of hypothermia and to the place where you get hot and you take off your clothes. And I unzipped my coat, even though I knew better, and began to fall asleep. And would wake back up when I collapsed and hit the rock, because we were off the ice at that point. And then I collapsed and hit the rock, and I stood back up again. And I remember thinking that this is it. This is it. Nothing I can do about it. And go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking. A thought came to me is that when you get to that point, where you are, you understand that this is the end, and you have no fight in you anymore. Our instinct, that fight or flight instinct, when you get to the point where it's like, oh crap, I guess I've tried as much as I can. This is where I have to go. And that's why I was just picturing that in my mind as you're standing there thinking, okay, this is the end. What happens next?
That's what happened, and I was driven all night long by fear of dying, and this. I felt like I was tapping into this deep resource inside. I didn't even know that I was capable of, and that I had this willpower that I kept digging deeper to drive myself forward, because we hadn't eaten, for hours and hours and hours. And I was a skinny little 21-year-old, and I consumed all my fat, and was just trying to, on my willpower with Tim, drive ourselves forward with his willpower too. But then there was like you said, there was this point at which I knew that it was done, and I became peaceful. A peace settled on me, and I thought, oh well, think about my parents, think about my siblings, think about God, and keep pulling on the rope. But once I fell asleep, I knew that, and once I began to fall asleep, it's the end. And so I stood back up, and as I stood back up this one time, I had what they call tunnel vision, which I experienced as a black circle around all my peripheral vision, one big loop that closed in like a stage spotlight rapidly to a singular point right in front of me, and then it just closed and became darkness. And when it became darkness, I thought I should be asleep. Why am I not asleep? Why am I still conscious? And I didn't feel myself collapse, and I was confused about what was going on. And then the darkness expanded into this infinitely wide open darkness that was it was like all that I could see was an illuminated darkness extending into infinity. And way far, far, far away from me, there was a pinprick of light that immediately communicated to me telepathically, non-linguistically, I'm coming to take you. And and I experienced this thing, this entity, as intelligence, as all power, and it rushed toward me, covering an impossible distance of, I don't know, to give it the length of the universe, the length of the time of the universe. It was that far away, and it came to me so quickly, and it remained like a singular entity, but it also expanded and filled my vision at the same time. And as it came to me in an instant, it was communicating, I'm taking you, and I said to it, no, you're not, and it just plucked me like I was a pebble on the beach. Just picked me up no matter what my will was. And I was resistant, and suddenly once I was enveloped in this, I call my angel of death. Once I was enveloped in the wings, but they weren't wings and they weren't arms. There was more like an energy ball of intelligence. Once I was enveloped in this, I was comforted. I was content, and I just was carried, and up the tunnel became narrow, the darkness became a narrow tunnel, but also remained this very wide space, these opposites, paradoxes. And the next thing I knew, I was popped into what I describe as an infinite, eternal, illuminated darkness. And I could see in every direction all at once. I was an orb of energy that was 10,000 times bigger than my body and my physical body. But my first thought was, this is me. This is me. How did I ever think that was me? And I could see in every direction at once. I was content. I was not afraid. I recognized where I was, but I was alone. And then a portal opened in front of me, like a door, like an opening. But I had no front. I was like, I had 10,000 eyes and one eye. It was like my seeing and my thinking and my personness were all one thing, not separate. And this portal opened up, and it was a flowing, shimmering covering that was translucent and transparent that I could see through to an elongated, infinitely long tunnel, another tunnel, and I reached and I touched the surface area of this beautiful flow that was, like I said, translucent and transparent. And as soon as I touched it with the consciousness of my energy, my soul, it entered into me, flowed into me like all life and all love and all beauty and all knowledge and all it was like all of the expanse of this infinite illuminated darkness that I was floating inside of, all compressed and came rushing inside of me, all livingness. And then I tell the story in a sequence of events, but it's timelessness. There's no sequence of events. I have no molecules. There's no matter, and there's no time. And this I'm entered into, and I hear my name called. Only it's not Peter. It's the name that called me in, my soul into being. And simultaneous to hear my name being called, I see myself in my original created form, like a photon, a singular emanation of created light made from all of the light of all of the universe, all compressed into one star, but not collapsed into a black hole. All of those photons, I am a photon like all of them, but I'm separate from it, and I have this experience of seeing what I call the long tail of my soul, was like this everlasting my existence through time, even though I was in timelessness. And my soul, I saw that I was created by Creator. All of this was happening inside of me and outside of me, and there was no language. There was all instant understanding. And I had all knowledge available to me. I wanted to understand how the universe functioned from the molecular level below that and above that, and instantly I understood. And I also went through a hell of my own making. All of this, all at once. And go ahead.
I'm going to stop you right there, because it's important for my listener, because of other things we've talked about. A hell of your own making. Please tell me what you mean by that.
I mean that I carried with me into death all of the suffering I gave away in life. And it was all of the intentional suffering I gave away and all of the unintentional suffering I gave away. And I experienced it, and my life review was experiencing a sequence of events from my life, from the point of view of everyone I gave pain to, from their point of view, and the pain that I gave them, which seemed to me at the time to be minuscule, was 10,000 times greater in pain level than I ever imagined, and that I gave it to me. When I gave it to them, when I caused pain to another person, intentionally or unintentionally, I actually gave it to myself. And so I experienced all this pain from their point of view inside myself, 10 tempered by the love that was given to me in life and the love that I gave away, which also came with me, but which seemed to me to allow me to turn my face, my metaphorical face, because I had no face, toward the light itself that was outside of me and inside of me, surrounding me. So as I was going through the sequence of events, experiencing all this pain, the voice that had no sound was saying inside me, I love you, I made you, I know you, I know all about you, I know your life from as Peter, I know all of your life from everlasting to everlasting, I know you as a created creature who I made, I know there was nothing about you that's hidden from me. I need you. I love you as I have always loved you and always will love you. And I forgive you. And I judged myself. I self-judged in the midst of all of this as guilty because I saw the pain that I had given away as the opposite of love. And it wasn't so much that I was forgiven because of the love that I carried with me. I was forgiven because the eternal nature of the divine love is far greater than anything I could ever do to damage that relationship. And meanwhile, in the midst of all of this, I could also see all of the suffering of all of humanity in terms of the same kind of giving of pain to other people as the natural function of being a human being. And so even though I caused all this pain, and I suffered my own hell because I made choices that caused this pain, it was not my fault that I had the capacity to make the choice. The capacity to make the choice is the nature of the universe, not just of humanity, but the nature of the separation from the purity of being as permeating all of the physical nature of all of the universe, including human beings. And so human beings, as part of nature, it's a function of being a human being that we hurt others. Everything consumes something else in this world in order to exist in this universe. Everything consumes something else. Everything's made from something else. Everything and we do the same to people. We consume people. We hurt people. But I was forgiven, and then when I was forgiven, there was this. I was then infilled with this combination as oneness of being, this unity, love, beauty, joy, understanding, truth, adoration, bliss, awe, paradise, wholeness, healing, well-being, eternal nature filled my orb of my consciousness to within a molecule of exploding my own containment of myself into the nothingness of being. It's like there was so much of this beauty that was injected in me that one more drop of it and I would have been annihilated back into the oneness itself. And so I experienced this unity of being, but also this separateness at the same time, because I knew that I was less than the wholeness. But I was completely a part of the wholeness. My existence existed because of the wholeness. That this unity that it was, is, and it always will be me. But I am less than all of it. And then when the intensity of that was over, I said to the voice, which is what it was like this. I called it the voice in my head later on. Am I dead? And the voice said, yeah, you're dead. And I said, well, I can't leave. I can't be dead now. And the voice said, but come home. It's time for you to come home. Come home to me. Come home to me. I am love. I am all love. And the love, the immensity of the love that I experienced it's inexpressible. It's all of the universe, all the love that's ever existed in all the universe in one single place at one single time is too small. It's so overwhelmingly content and peace and fullness and knownness. And I said, I can't go now. I have parents who are suffering. I had a family issue going on, and my mom got ill as a result, and for a long period of time. And I knew that if I left, my sister had vanished, and I knew that if I left, my mom would be utterly broken forever. And so God swept me to the edge of the universe and showed me all of Earth and all human beings, all 7 billion, all at once, all in live time, doing what they were doing. And I could see them all covered by a veil of unknowing. And the voice said to me, in the way I love you now know that I have always loved you eternally. And I can't describe the love to you. It's overwhelming. It gave me so much understanding, self-understanding. And I understood that every single person was beloved. And the voice said, because of my love, you now know all was well, is well, and will be well for every single person, including your parents. And I could see my parents' faces in particular, and I could see the length of their life until their deaths without me and the suffering that they would endure. And the voice said, even so, you know now all's well, come home. Come home now. And I said, I can't. I can't make them suffer the loss of another child and endure in that time slot, even though I know that in the end they'll be like me, whole and healed and well without suffering. I couldn't bear to make them go through if I had a choice. And I said I hadn't gone through the tunnel yet. And God said, no, you haven't, but come home. And I said, do I have to? And God said, no, you don't. I said, well, if I go back to life, can I come back here and to this oneness of being? And God said, yes. And I said, I choose to live my life. And God said, you won't live your life, and sent me back. And I was presented with all of these like 10 million entry points back into my life. And it was like a circle. And they were all 10 million little like fiber optic entry points, like a cable on a suspension bridge, and they had all these intersections inside of them. And in the center of all of this was like the singularness of the light of being itself. And I could choose anywhere I wanted to go into this. And so in an instant, I thought to myself, I want to maintain some identity. And so I kind of went. I didn't go into the center of the oneness. I went off to the side to it. And the next thing I knew, I'm being crushed and squished and shoved painfully back into my body again. And now I'm completely disoriented because now I'm in pain for the first time. It feels like I didn't understand. I had forgotten what pain was. I'd forgotten what life was. I'd forgotten what suffering is. I'd forgotten what everything was. And now all of a sudden, all of it was rushing back into my consciousness. And I don't know how long that process took, but my body was being jostled. I became aware of the pain in my body as it was being jostled. Everything hurt. And eventually, my partner, Tim, helped me stand, but I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't know. I opened my eyes, but I didn't know what a Tim was or what a body was or what language was or even breathing or rock or anything else. And it took this time period for my brain to come back online. And finally, Tim's screaming at me, "You were dead. You were dead. If you died, I was going to die." And he's screaming and yelling at me. And the great thing about him as a partner is that he was super level-headed. Me too. We were during this entire event. We were neither of us panicked. Both of us kept our composure completely. But at this moment, Tim was right. If I had died, he was going to die too. And then he said, he got me to pull the rope, and I pulled the rope, and the rope came free on the first, whatever had jammed it around the corner in the dark, released. We went down to the bottom. It's only like 70 yards out to the highway, to the parkway, where the car was. And we knowing better than jumping in the car and trying to get warm fast, we got up the tent and we set it up, and we slowly warmed our body temperatures back up to a level where I thought we were able to go into the car, and we blasted the heat and survived the night. And
Jeez.
I was not the same person from then on. I felt like I could do all these things in the world, and Tim was looking at me like I was the same guy, but I was a completely different person. I felt like I was a marionette inside a body that I'm kind of moving around, going through the motions, thinking, what is going on here? And then my life changed.
I'm going to take you back, just touch base on your experiences. You went through the thing where you were shown your negative interactions with people or with the world. Were you also come out of that and shown all your positive ones too, that you recall?
The positive ones, no. But the love that I gave away and the love that was given to me kind of came as bulk. Okay,
so did that offset some of the negative ones?
It was what enabled me, upon reflection, it was an enabled me to turn my face, turn my heart, turn my soul to the light itself. So in the years since then, and I changed my life. I was going to become, I was an English major, but I was going to go in the family architecture firm, so I was going to go to graduate school in architecture. I've been drawing my whole life at my, at the drafting board and art and I worked in college, but that all changed, and I went to divinity school instead, studied mysticism at Yale, kind of on the down low with the dean of students, working for my master's of. And as a result of my studies in mysticism, I came across the writings of Catherine of Genoa, and in one of her writings, she talks about the divine fire of purgative love and her mystical experience, and that is a super summation of languaging what happened to me. The divine fire of purgative love cleansed me, burned all of the excess from me, enabling me to enter into the oneness of being. And what enabled me to perceive the love, to hear the voice, was all the love that I'd experienced and given away. So did the love weigh more than the suffering? Yeah, I think so. If I was going to put it on a scale, I think that there's this old story of when you die, you get carried to heaven and they set up a scale in front of you and they pull out your heart and they put it on one side of the scale, and on the other side of the scale they put a feather. And the stone of your heart versus the feather of God, and the feather of God weighs more.
Okay. Yeah. I like that. That's a good one. Good way of putting it. Your book, which is out now, Heaven is Beautiful, How Dying Taught Me That Death is Just the Beginning. Your book, it came out a few years ago, but it's a fascinating read if anyone wants to look that up. Again, it's Heaven is Beautiful, How Dying Taught Me That Death is Just the Beginning. You can get that on Amazon and paperback, and you can get it on Kindle too. Peter, your near-death experience sounds like it took you out and brought you back almost as a reboot of who you are, cleaning a lot of the old stuff out. So you come back in with not only a different perspective mentally, but soul-wise, it's clean. It's like, okay, you've already accepted you did these things that hurt people. You've been forgiven for it. You're not going to have to go through that again, but you will have to go through it for the next time you show up. Yep. So coming back in almost like a pure state, as a child again, as being reborn. How was that moving through? Like, you were in your 20s at the time. Now you're moving through as an adult brain with this new understanding. How did that affect you? Other than obviously your curiosity switch got ramped up, and you were studying, went to Yale, and you're kind of digging into divinity and mysticism. Other than that, your interpersonal relationships, how did it affect that?
Everything changed. I asked my mom and dad, who are still alive, who are quite elderly and getting ready to leave now as we speak. About 3 years ago, I said to my dad, so what happened? That summer I came back, because I kept this a secret for 20 years. And the summer I came back, I said, Dad, what did you notice about me? He said, well, your mother and I, we talked, and you were much kinder, much more compassionate. You were much more attentive and much more loving. You were a good kid, he said, to reassure me. But he said, you came back just entirely kind. And so one of the side effects is that when I know that I hurt somebody, I try not to hurt people, even though I do, and I try to make amends as often as I can. And I expect to go back through again. And one of the side effects I had is, as soon as I came back, I realized that I made this huge mistake and I never should have left. And so I began a 30-year practice of praying every day for my own death. And knowing that I was going to go back, expecting that I was going to go back, will go back through a hell of my own making, and totally willing to do so. Can't wait, want to, desire it. And so my interpersonal relationships, everything about me changed. I couldn't go to architecture school. I walk out in nature. I became super empathic. And so anytime I was in nature, I was immersed in the presence of the spirit that leaks through. I was leaving on a theater tour. So I was at Montana State University as an exchange student. And I ended up getting in the Theater of Silence, which was a sign language theater. It'd been 10 years they'd been doing it, 24,000 miles, 64 shows. And I was supposed to be in the van with everybody, the passenger van. I couldn't do it. And I couldn't be around people because I could feel their emotions. And I was so lost inside myself, not understanding what had happened to me. I took my backpack and my sleeping pad, and I said to the director, I can't drive. I was supposed to be one of the drivers. And I sat in the back of the pickup truck for 24,000 miles by myself most of the time. Saw America, saw the Great West, but I spent as much time as I possibly could in those early days, and subsequently diving inside. I had the great fortune when I was in high school to learn meditation, centering prayer through the Trappists, and they learned, Trappist monks, this particular monastery had been studying some Zen and some, with Sasaki Roshi and Maharishi Mahayogi, and so they had this centering prayer technique that I began practicing before I died, and used it as my tool to dive inside. And so I decided that since I made the mistake of coming back, I would dig and dig and dig, which was heretical in Christianity, because only Jesus is supposed to get, that's supposed to be enough, but that was not enough. I had to dig my way back. And so I've spent my whole life digging my way back. I'm still digging my way back.
You say you made a mistake of coming back.
Oh.
I think, and this is me talking to people who've experienced many, many different things over the years, but if you were to come back and share your experience with somebody, which flicks a switch in them, and they share an experience which flicks a switch in two more, the pyramid effect going out that helps other people is a gift that you're giving. It's not like what's the term? It's not like you're not providing and helping others, which is a spark that you're bringing. And I think that I don't ever want you to be hard on yourself about it being a negative or being to come back, because every person you tell your story to, or who actually has a bit of a life change or takes a deep breath and thinks within themselves your story, or even and then relates that to their own personal path, those are gifts you're giving to people that they would not have got. I think your coming back has led you to touch many lives, which has allowed them to live the gift you're giving. And that is the byproduct of you coming back. The mistake itself, if you didn't come back, those people may be trapped in a cycle where they can't fulfill their own paths. I just, this is me being the policeman in me. Don't want you to be hard on yourself about this. I think you're doing the right thing. I think you did the right thing in coming back, and it just my spidey senses kind of went, oh, it's not a mistake. You're supposed to come back.
Well, I was definitely given the choice to come back, and the morning that we self-treated for hypothermia, the next morning, in between, we got arrested, spent time in jail, and towed the car, and I ended up hitchhiking back to Bozeman by myself. And that morning at sunrise, the voice was screaming inside me, "You're a messenger now. You're my messenger." And I was pretty upset about that and was resistant to it for a long time. So I kept my mouth shut. I didn't talk for 20 years about this, even though I dove deeper and deeper into it in my interior world. The mistake I felt was that I gave up oneness of being to be back in the duality, knowing that I get to go back again, but not understanding that my life was not going to be my own. Now, a year before that, on the Appalachian Trail, backpacking in Massachusetts, I had a vision. Where I was at night, I was raptured out of my body and brought by this angel who I did not know at the time into a heaven where I could see myself from outside myself and see what was going on from inside myself. And I was in my astral body, and these hands appeared, and they entered into this. I was in the ocean of wisdom, and these hands appeared, and they were human-looking hands, and one of them carried a glass vial filled with sparkly gold dust, and the cap came undone, and my two hands were put together in a cup, kind of not by my will, and the vial was emptied into my hands, piling up this gold dust, and a breath came and blew it all away, and the voice said to me, "This is yours, now give it away." And it wasn't until much later that I was able to put all of that together. And so I agree with you, James. It is my job. That's what I'm here for. That's what I've been doing. Even when I was keeping it a secret, that's what I've been doing. And so my desire to go home again is merely selfish, because I long for my beloved. One of the side effects for me here is that now I belong to, God told me I belonged to God when I was a kid, but once I went to heaven, I understood that I didn't just belong to God as Peter, but the very created nature of my essence of my being, that which calls me into being, that part of me belongs to God, and so I just long for it, and so that was the propeller for my deep dive into a life of living in the regular world of contemplation, mysticism, and kind of raja and heartful meditation practices in order to reconnect me to the best of my capacity on my side of the job. My job here is to dig my way back, to create inside of myself a container unit, an opening, a valve, a set of valves to open for a flow to come through me so that I can reconnect myself. So I can use, as Meister Eckhart said, the eye wherein I see God, God sees me. And so the purpose of my practice was to find the I within myself, to make my I singular so my body could be filled with light, so I could be as much at home in heaven while I'm living here on earth. And a side effect of that pursuit was this life of being a messenger. And so my whole life, my whole professional career, from the moment this came back, everything about me has been about this. And I was resistant to it for sure. And I was upset at myself for my choice, absolutely. But in the decades that have followed, I've come, and I died again in 2015. I had a heart attack. I died in 2015. I ran 5K the day before. I was in a yoga class, and I have congenital thing in my family, and 100% blockage in my widowmaker. And I live in a rural place, an hour and a half from the catheterization lab, with no hospital in town. And so I died in the ambulance. And all my life I'd been wanting to go back. And I told my wife that first chance I get, I'm going home. And so she was at the urgent care center and said goodbye to me. And I smiled away, squeezed her hand, and my son showed up and he said, "I love you, Dad." He looked in my eyes and grabbed my hand. And it turned out the doc had said to my son, "You better say goodbye to your dad because this is your last chance." So I'm sorry. So on the way, I died, and I left my body in an instant, and the angel was there again to collect me. Come home, it's time to go home. I love you, we love you. And I went, and then I started thinking about my wife and my kids and my granddaughter and my daughter's divorce and the brand new baby and the potential dangers of the ex who had some troubles, let's say. And I decided that I couldn't leave yet. And so and I was completely unafraid. I have no fear of death, zero. And I've been saying that my whole life since I came back. And it turns out I don't have fear of death. I was completely calm and had no meds on board. I couldn't take opiates because they make me sick. So I was completely conscious through this whole thing, meditating, using meditation as my tool to control my pain. But I chose to come back, and so here I am still. And the book was released while I was in the hospital. Amazon released it early, and I'm still in the hospital, and they released the book. And I got re-shook up as a result of this, and I recommitted myself in a deeper way to my job. I'm just a messenger. A messenger, not the messenger, just a messenger. I think that there are millions of messengers who medical science has been dragging back as science is driving spirituality forward because they're resuscitating the dead all over the world, across all these cultures, for 50 years now. And so there's all these tens of millions of us all over the world coming back, having gone to heaven to varying degrees of experience, many of us coming back with a message of love. And I recognize that it's never about me. I'm not the light of the world any more than you are. You are, just like I am. But I work for the light, and I point to the light, not to me, because I'm just this tiny created thing that the Creator called into being.
When you came back, Peter, from the second near-death experience, did you find that these empathic traits or the intuitive side of you had been cranked up again? Or
everything got cranked up. Everything got cranked up. Yeah. But not in the way that people are like, do you still have mystical experiences? Yes, I do. But they're secondary to me. They're all of these things, all of these gifts have become completely secondary to the pursuit of the oneness of being. Over the decades of my pursuit of that one goal, I'm not looking for joy in life. I'm not looking for being more empathetic. I'm not looking to be like a psychic. I'm not looking for any of those things. All those things are good, but I'm not interested in particular in pursuing any of them. I just want the unity. And so the intensity of the experience now is that the long practice of my inward journey has become more radiant in my regular life, and so much so that it's become perceivable to it's from the moment I came back, people could see it in me. And I would always say, that's not me you're looking at. That's not me you're falling in love with. I know that it's the light in me seeing the light in you. And now that light has become more radiant. And and I guess that's the biggest side effect from the second one, is that, well, it's just all my chakras like popped open, and that's kind of the thing.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about people looking at you and seeing the light. We talk a lot about, we being my listener and I and our guests, some guests, we talk about empaths and higher vibration people. Not that we're not all high vibration, but some people wear it differently, and we attract those who are still in their human form, are very low, and they just kind of congregate. They're drawn to us and suck the life out of us. And
Yep.
it's taken me years to realize that it's there. That love at first sight is bad. Love at first sight is usually, oh, I can fix you. My subconscious is looking at you going, oh, I can fix you. And they're looking at me like, oh, he can fix me. But it's not real. It's not that connection. And it's taken a while for me to understand that there is I was almost saying The Shining. There is a light. There is a force, a life force, a light force that is within all of us. And depending on how we've lived our life, it's at different intensities, and those intensities will sometimes complement each other, but most of the time not. There's about, I think, statistically, they were looking at, and the statistics are based on those people who lucid dream, because no one actually has a statistic on empaths in the population. But only empaths lucid dream, which is 24 to 26% of the population, but it's growing as more people are becoming more in tuned and awakened, and as our planet shifts a bit. Your life and your client base. Now, you do counseling, and you do personal appearances and things. Have you found that you draw a lot of negative to you?
Yes, and I was a church pastor for 18 years and did a lot of pastoral counseling, and I was sort of hiding out in the church. I wasn't sort of hiding out. I felt like I was a secret agent for God, the nameless, ineffable, the source of all being, love, working inside the human religious organization, and people were sucking me dry. The energy vampires were coming by and sucking off my soul. And then I discovered that I could create a reservoir of light inside myself through my meditative practice, and the larger as I enlarged the space inside myself, I had a greater capacity to hold my chi, my prana, the Holy Spirit, whatever you want to call it, the energy, and then I could dispense it, but I would run out. And then I discovered that if I opened up both taps at once, the flow flows through me, and as much is taken from me, I always have more. I'm not drained anymore. I mean, I can get physically drained, like I'm exhausted from speaking, or I'm exhausted from this conversation, not this conversation, but I can be exhausted from a conversation. No, definitely not this conversation, but you know what I mean. And so, but I found that if I open both taps, the in and the out, I have an endless supply. And so I do attract all sorts of people who are in need at lots of different levels. And I know that all of the counseling and words I try to use to help them on their path is secondary to the communication of the I'm kind of loath to use this word, but it's the closest I can come, and I think it's the Shakti, which is the giving of the light itself, and that's always my goal, is the giving of the light itself. And so I did this. I had a TV spot for 15 years, and 2 minutes to give a devotion every day on these NBC stations before the weather in the early morning, and I would meditate while I wrote. I would meditate in the studio while I spoke, weave inside the words the light itself and become, when I was writing, and then when I was speaking it, I tried to weave it inside the words so that my throat chakra would carry the energy of the divine light, and my eyes looking in the lens would project the divine light. I try to get myself out of the way. Meditation is always it can always be about getting yourself out of the way. It can also be about mindfulness. But I use it as a tool to negate the false self. And so on all these things that I try to do, my real goal is not the language I use, but the communication of the divine experience itself as best as I'm able to get out of the way and let it flow. And when I think that when an individual experiences the light themselves, even just a tiny little bit, that's enough to propel them, or maybe enough to propel them or to plant a seed in them for the light to expand, to grow. Like Jesus said, heaven is like the tiniest of all seeds. So I'm trying to plant all these seeds of heaven inside of people as I go, and let them grow as they do. It's not my job or my responsibility to try to bring anyone into the light. My job is merely to show it and to present it. And that's exactly what I try to do all the time. Within the mud man myself of all my own frailties and foibles and, picadillos and all the rest of the things that make me a human being. Because I ain't perfect. That is for sure. This is not about my character or personality of my own perfection. That's not what this is about.
There's no human is perfect.
Nope.
If you come to this plane perfect, you're taken back pretty quick because you've got nothing to learn.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
It's the way you're talking about turning on both taps. Since around 2012, I've had the good fortune to be pointed out that I can actually read cards for people or read people. And one of the things I used to say, I'd look at somebody and say, I can only describe this as like you're a teapot with a bunch of cracks in it, and your energy is going in multiple directions to your children, to your neighbors, to work. Everybody is drawn to you, and they're just, like we talk about energy vampires, or they're just sucking all this energy out. And the universe, God is providing you with your energy for yourself. It's constantly coming in the top of the teapot, but it's going out the side, so you're not filling. And this is why you're not feeling well. And then every so often I'll find somebody who's on power. Not every so often, quite often you get somebody, or when that person starts to understand a little bit more, and through meditation this happens a lot, that the breaks and the cracks in the teapot are done. So their energy is completely filled. Now their teapot is full, it is theirs, and they're on path. Now when somebody comes into them, they're no longer giving them their own energy. They're a conduit for source.
Yes.
Comes into them and out without dropping their own personal level down. And that's, like you say, turning the both taps on. You are a conduit for where this all comes from, the universe. You are a conduit, and that's your support for other people without leaving you that empty shell that we used to be before we kind of understood this stuff, where you'd kind of just want to be home. I have an older daughter, an older daughter. She's not older than me. She's my oldest daughter is a very, very high vibration young lady. She went through all the high anxiety as a younger post-puberty kind of child, because all her friends at school would come and dump on her. Oh, you're the best listener. You give the best hugs. I feel so good after talking to you. And my daughter would come home from school and just want to be locked in her bedroom. Don't talk to me. I don't want to talk to anybody. I want to see anybody. And, it basically, her mother sent her to a child psychologist. She said, she's oppositional defiant disorder. Here's a book, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Well, I snuck her off to see a psychic 2 days later. My psychic friend says, oh God, no, she's an empath through the roof, and taught her how to block and deflect.
Right.
And 2 weeks later, we go back to the child psychologist, and the child psychologist is like, "Oh, you're cured? How did that happen?" And my daughter just smiled because I said, "You do not tell the child psychologist you went to see a psychic. In fact, don't tell mommy you went to see the psychic," for a while. And that was it. All she needed to do was learn how to deflect and not take on other people's problems. But, you know, and this specifically, one of her friends' mother had cancer. And the daughter would be just drawn to my daughter and say, "I don't know what to do. My mom might die." And my daughter was coming home and taking on that grief, and oh my God, it's like my mom might die, or she was personalizing everybody's problems. And what she did the next time the kid came up to her and said, "Oh, my mother's this, my mother's that," and my daughter said, "Well, have you talked to the school counselor? Does your mother go to counseling right now? Have you gone with her? Have you talked to the doctor?" And it just deflected it. And my daughter was like 14 and doing that. And and she was fine. She'd come home happy and giddy and like didn't want, communicate with the rest of the family, didn't want to be locked in a room, and was great. And again, it's just she wasn't giving her energy out and wasn't that beat up shell of a person when she came home. And it's, a kid, just a kid. And it's quite refreshing to hear you talk about the turning both taps on. It makes me happy that you're actually filled, for one thing, and that you understand when you counsel, when you give, you're giving through you, not of you.
Right. It took a long time to figure that out, but I did. And now it works much better. And for those before you have an opportunity to experience that for yourself, for your listener who may need to protect his or herself from an energy vampire. Someone once told me to just fold my hands over my second chakra. So I'd be sitting in my counseling in the pastor's office, and when I felt like they were just sucking me dry, I'd both of my hands over my second chakra, and it stopped the flow.
Mm-hmm. The other thing too, as a person of authority, like I spent 28 years in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, when you're talking to people, a lot of times you watch body language, and that's actually a natural place for some people to put their hands. And it's a protective part. Well, that is it's somewhat protective when they're sitting down. Real protection is back of the neck and armpits, because and the groin. Those are the three places that somebody can kill us.
Right.
Yeah, the back of the neck,
right,
in up in there, and the groin area with femoral arteries. Those are, if someone's fearing for their life, that's where you watch them put their hands. But if you're, as a supervisor, giving somebody a lecture, it was quite common to see people just sit with their hands like folded on their lap, which is your second chakra, and they're like, okay, I don't want him taking my energy or tapping in, but it's subconscious, and it's I could be reading too much into it or not, but it's interesting that you covering your second chakra is a good way to keep people from tapping in.
I've heard, I had some police friends who would say stuff like that to me, and no one ever said to me about the covering the second chakra part, but it just seems natural to me. Now that I do it, now that I've done it, it just feels like, okay, I'm all whole now. You can't take that from me.
Yep. Yeah, and it goes both ways too. You're blocking them from tapping into it, and
right,
also not allowing you to be giving it,
right,
without your own permission. And that's the big thing. It's the consent, giving our consent to give. Through meditation, saying, I will provide this to this person, I will share with this person. You're giving your being consent to share, which is the best way, as opposed to them having to tap it. Because then again, you're the conduit, as opposed to you're shoveling out of your own your own vibration, your own energy.
I found that as an empath that if I shut it off, I lost all my superpowers. And if I left it on, I was vulnerable. And so I had to figure out a balance between those two things in order to function in the world. Because it's like having an extra sense. And I use it. I live with it. It's part of who I am. And so I stopped going to concerts because I couldn't deal with the energy of people in mass groups. I moved to the countryside, very rural living. And so I tried to control my environment in which I was functioning in order not to be accidentally permeated by other people's emotional status.
Do you turn yourself off, though, or protect yourself? Or some people put themselves in a bubble through meditation. Do you ever do that just literally to sleep? Because being bothered by dead people between 3 and 4:30 in the morning, bringing home those who haven't crossed over can be a little bit irritating, unless you are at a vibration where they don't really bother you as much as they did when you were a kid.
Yeah, they don't tend to bother me so much, and I use my meditation, my powers of my mental focus to shut my mind off to go to sleep, and
Good.
So I guess in that way I've protected myself from it. When I am available, though, I mean, I'm like generally available to that kind of stuff just because I don't want to shut it off. Like I want to be able to feel people's emotions, because so you talked earlier about the vibration level of light in people. One of the side effects of my near-death experience is I see light in every single person, and it's like if you've ever seen the drawing of the eyeball on the hand.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like I have eyeballs on my hands, and I feel people. I feel their chakras, their auras, their energy, whatever the heck you want to call it. And so I use, if I shut off my empathy, I kind of close that whole thing down. And so I lose this capacity to understand better. And so I kind of leave it open all the time for that reason. And because of my long experience now with it, when I encounter people who are an immense amount of negative energy, like bad people. Like I was walking one day in the city up in Maine, not the capital, but the biggest city, and I was near the federal courthouse, and I was walking on the block, and there comes a suit, obviously a lawyer, and a guy who doesn't look like a suit, obviously the criminal. And as I walked by these guys, I was within 2 or 3 feet of the criminal's aura, like of his person, and it was like sweeping through a wall of pollution. I was like washed right through me, and I gave these guys a wide berth. And as I went by, because it was so powerful to me, I kind of turned and looked, and he turned too. He felt I wasn't near him, okay? I was far enough away that on the street you wouldn't even look at me. But as I looked at him, he looked at me. It was like he's feeling me, I'm feeling him. And it took me a while to shake that off. I had to go into meditation to try to like clean that away so that I didn't carry any of his stuff.
I felt... This is way before I knew anything what an empath was or any of this woo-woo stuff. I was doing surveillance on a serial killer. And, of course, we didn't look like policemen. I had long hair and a beard back when I had hair. And I walked up behind him. He was at a animal or a pig or livestock auction, and he was buying some hogs. And I walked up behind him, and I couldn't stand behind him because I wanted to see what he was writing and who he was talking to, and I literally stopped about 4 feet behind him or a little past arm's length, and I hesitated because it was like there was a big hole between me and him. Like I was going to fall into this hole. He was later convicted of killing 22 people, but he killed a lot more. But very, very odd feeling, like you're standing on the, well, maybe not you because you climb mountains, but if you're standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon and looking down, there's that whoa kind of feeling. Well, people like me who don't climb mountains, that was the feeling I got. Your stomach kind of turned, and that's the only way I could describe that feeling. It wasn't that I feeling sick. It was just like, oh, I'm going to fall into a hole. It's almost like vertigo. Is what I'm trying to say. The vertigo of it. But of course, back then I had no idea what it was like, and I dealt with lots of criminals. But this is since 1989, so 90% of the criminals I dealt with are regular folk who suffer from addiction. And their crimes are based on providing for the addiction. So are they quote unquote bad people? Not really. There was a few people in there who were very violent people, and a couple of murderers. Over 28 years, you run into them. But the serial killer, the active murderer, that was the one I felt something from. The other ones were, I found, and it was kind of funny because they said that I was really good at interviewing and getting confessions. And then in hindsight now, with this whole empath side of things and the higher vibration or lower vibration, I ran a bank robbery unit or a robbery unit, and I could walk in and sit down beside somebody, and you could see them totally relax. And then they just wanted to tell me their life stories. And people were saying, you're really good at this. And I said, yeah, it's not too bad. Like, they'll tell me anything. But now in hindsight, I can go, yeah, well, they were at a very low point in their life, very low point. And now I come in and they go, oh, this feels really good. I'll tell this person anything. And it was them, their energy feeling my energy and being comfortable with sharing why they were in that space. Because literally, bank robbery is a symptom of a medical condition called drug addiction. And once they understand that you understand that, they'll confess to everything. And then I just get them into recovery as opposed to send them to prison, because that would be just silly. But it is a different way of seeing people who are in a really crappy point in their life. And you'll see them as a counselor. They'll come into you and something in their life is gone off the rails, and you'll find they just get chatty.
Yep.
And it's like you're looking at the clock thinking, oh my God, I should have, I should be taking a lot fewer notes than I am, because I've just filled up 2 books. But they'll get chatty. They'll come in for problem A, and they've gone through the alphabet of problems before they leave. It's and it's you. It is you. It's your energy and your acceptance that they feel.
Yeah. So did your higher ups ever suspect that it was this special thing that you had inside you?
No, but I teach that now. On the side, I will get a whole bunch of policemen, and again, empath careers are maids, butlers, bartenders, waiters, waitresses, artists, musicians, nurses, teachers, doctors, vets, veterinarians, and in some cases veterans or military and police and EMTs. We all gravitate to, and in your case, pastor, clergy, and counselors, because we all gravitate to careers where we are helping other people. Mm-hmm. Now, in policing, you're going to get the percentage of policemen who do the job because, they like to drive fast for some reason. And then the other ones are there to help people. And those people gravitate towards being really good in community policing and in some of the major crime sections where they're a little more empathic and really good at interview and interrogation. We'll call it interrogation. Yeah, it is interview interrogation. It's just natural for them. And it's nothing that can be taught. It's something that it's there. And what I do now is I point that out to people. A friend of mine actually used to teach interview and interrogation, and he's a very extremely high empath too. He didn't know what an empath was. And I pointed it out, and he said, yeah, these are all, this has been in your life, right? And he looked at me and said, how did you know all that? The unfortunate part with all that, we are also, in my research on this, we are the only ones who suffer from PTSD.
Oh.
And it's not from what we've done or what we've seen, but it's how management has treated us as a result of what we've seen or what we've done.
You mean in police work?
In police work or military. We'll see something and you'll say, oh man, that was horrid. And your boss will look at you and say, suck it up, buttercup. Get back to work. And you can't understand why that person doesn't see the things the way you do. And you get, and as an empathic person in a team environment, you're always wanting to make everyone on the team feel good, and also make your boss understand, or your bosses like, hey, this is what we did. Didn't we do a good job? And if they look at you and say, no, you didn't, it's like, well, hold on, I really did, because I saved all these people. We freed these people. We did this. We, saved this guy's life. Yeah, but you weren't wearing your hat when you did it, and you didn't do the right paperwork.
Right.
So it overwhelms you that way. So it's getting that person out of the PTSD. And I ran into this because I would go to for my PTSD, I'd go to a operational stress injury clinic, which was all Royal Canadian Mounted Police and Canadian military. And that's what the counselors were saying. I said, yeah, everybody in here is higher vibration. Everybody. From the counselors to the clients, there is no lower vibration clients coming in. Everybody has been seeing ghosts ever since they were kids. They were all very empathic. They're meditating, they're raising their vibrations and stuff. And it's how they were getting through their handling PTSD and getting off their medication was meditation. And what was the other one? Oh, there was this place, there was a ranch where horses, they'd go and work with horses, and the horses were healers, which is a weird thing, but the horses would actually pick their client. You'd walk up to the fence and a horse out of the group would come up and pick you, and that was the horse you were going to look after for the 2 weeks, and the horses were the ones that healed you. Whole other topic, but yeah, that's what I found with the connection with people who were at a very low point in their life and a very low which brought their vibration down, meeting somebody with a higher vibration and just like wanting to hug you. And it was amazing as a policeman, being you get an offender, once they break through that shield of perceiving that they're bad when they're really not bad, but they're perceiving I'm looking at them like they're bad because of the role I play in society. And once they realize I'm not looking at them as a bad person, they're extremely friendly and extremely forthcoming with why they did the things they did. And it's just getting them off on the next part of the path in their life, and hopefully that things will turn around for them.
I spent past several years sitting on Maine's domestic abuse homicide review panel, reviewing homicides for the state, and was privy to the detective interviews. I read hundreds of them, and I can, as an outsider looking at these verbatims, the detectives were masterful in their non-judgment of the human being that they were interviewing. Even if they did something heinous, it was amazing to me. And I wondered how they did it. Because I read these verbatims and it just seemed so natural. Like, how did you lead that person from here to there? How did you have the foresight to use those words? And maybe you just gave me a part of the puzzle, which is that they're just empathic. And it's the thing I couldn't see. Yeah,
they don't know why they do it or how they do it. The universe has put them into a specific position for a specific purpose, and you may have a 30-year career, and you were supposed to have interaction with two people in those 30 years.
Right. Those particular two.
Yeah, and those particular two, it was very important for them to be deflected onto a different path. And it could be from dealing with a victim or dealing with somebody who victimized someone. Mm-hmm. But your position in that 30 years, because time is linear for us, but in the universe it's flat.
Oh, yeah.
So 30 years walking around in this meat sack is a blink of a universe eye. It's nothing. So you actually spent an entire career, your 30 years, but you only had to bump into that person or these two people. And that's it. We're all intertwined and we're all working the same way. This is getting into my own personal belief system too, but that is why I believe those people are there in those positions. And there are people in those positions who are complete idiots too, who completely screw up and can push the wrong buttons on people and completely have the wrong outcome of an interview and are there just like a bull in a china shop and affecting the lives of other people's negatively in their 30-year career. Unfortunately, they're supposed to be there too. But the universe has its interesting ways of dealing with things. Sometimes God has an incredible sense of humor over and above the giraffe. Yeah. It's the things that we all have to interact with. You're also coming up to in August 14th to 16th. You're on a near-death experiencer panel. Tell me a little bit about that.
May I read you a little promo that I have prepared?
You certainly may, sir.
All right, here we go. IANS, the International Association of Near-Death Studies, will be hosting their 2020 live online conference August 14th to the 16th. This year's theme is Unlocking Healing Wisdom of Near-Death Experiences. The keynote speakers will be Anita Morjani, Dr. Mary Neal, Reverend Howard Storm, and Suzanne Geisman. There's an abundance of choices. Personal accounts of inspirational NDEs, up-to-date reports by expert researchers, healing help for grief, anxiety, and fear of death, a live participatory experiencers sharing lounge, 4 Zoom rooms with simultaneous programming. And I'm a plenary speaker on Saturday, August 15th, and I'll be talking about modern mysticism and you. So you can join IANS for their opening program, plus a 2-day informative package online conference, including 90 days video on demand access. And that's for more information, virtualconference.in. Let's take that again. Virtualconference.iands, virtualconference.ians.org. And that's my little spiel, and thanks for letting me read that out. I appreciate that. Listener, you can go and check that out when you're ready to.
Excellent. And what I'm going to do is I'll put a link for, if anyone's listening to this via Libsyn or one of the other ones where actually I can add a link. I'll be adding a link to Peter's website as well as the conference, online conference coming out. That'd be interesting. Near-death things have always fascinated me. I was asked after my car accident where I first saw this ghost kid if I had actually died, but I hadn't. I didn't even bump my head really hard because I had all sorts of out-of-body stuff after that. But it was more probably a shock to my system as opposed to an actual shutting down the system like you've had. I've interview some psychic friends of mine who are like Marianne Morgan, who was Ronald or Nancy Reagan's psychic, and Robin Williams' psychic, and Frank Sinatra and things like that. She's died 5 times, and she knows when she's going to die again. And how. And every time she passes and comes back, her abilities are cranked right up. I clear ghosts out of people's houses remotely around the world with a psychic named Skeeter Wellhouse. And she's died, again, I think she's on her 5th death too. Every time she's come back, her modalities are through the roof. And it's just kind of funny because we cleared some dead people out of a house not too long ago, and she now sees color, and where the people used to kind of walk towards her to the light, she now has deities come through and cross, and we had St. Peter come in and help out at one time a week or so ago, which is totally new. So every time she comes back, she's got some whole new toolkit to come through and work on these things. Your belief system now, you worked as a pastor, you went to divinity school, But again, you're a little bit outside in your thinking, possibly of like,
very,
let's say the Catholic Church. In your experience and in your teachings or in your studies, and in your experience after your near death and your interactions with other people, what religion do you see as being the closest that melds with your experience?
I can say these several things. I can say that the Self-Realization Fellowship with Paramahansa Yogananda has contacted me repeatedly. Some of the people in their higher-up organization saying that what I say aligns with what they say. What's the name of there's a book series, Course in Miracles. I repeatedly get contacted by people in the Course in Miracles who, just this week, somebody else, some of the higher-ups in that organization, having heard what I say, they say that it aligns very well there. I hear from Muslims on my YouTube channel. They say this aligns very much with Islam. I hear from evangelical literalist Christians who condemn me as a heretic and proclaim me as Satan's right-hand man. I find that the history of not a particular religion, but all forms of mysticism, Sufism, mysticism in the Western Catholic Church, mysticism in Orthodoxy, the mysticism of Hinduism, all these things are much closer to my experience of the divine than any religion. I find that Jesus, the moment I went to a Catholic high school. We read the Gospels one a year. Through my senior year, I became a Protestant after divinity school. Not that makes any difference, but Jesus sounds like a near-death experiencer to me. I don't think people understand anything he was talking about. He sounds like a code switcher. He sounds like he speaks two languages simultaneously. Like, in Eastern Canada and where I live, there's a lot of Quebecois, and they speak French and English in the same sentence. And they use French syntax. Right, Franglais, that's right, yeah. Or Spanglish. And I think Jesus was a code that's called code switching. And I think Jesus code switched between metaphor and Aramaic. And I think that he was always talking about heaven. And most people who read the Bible, the theologians, they just totally miss it. And so that's what I think about him. So I think Jesus more than Christianity, but there are definitely aspects of Christianity in the mystical realms that align pretty closely as well. You're always struggling with language. It's always about language, culture, context, history, education, mental capacity. So everyone who has a divine experience of I went to this place of non-being. No things, non-being, uncreatedness. I was uncreatedness when I was there. And so anytime we try to form concepts to hang language on which we hang concepts, it's always wrong. You can't contain the ineffable, but all we're left with is language forms to discuss it. So I chose Christianity as my language form because it was the cultural context of myself and of my environment. And so I dug deep inside the language in order to find ways of expressing it. But all of it's all just metaphor. None of it's accurate. And that's not just me. That's like all mysticism everywhere.
Well, it's one of the things that we don't know until we go. And I interviewed a fellow named Jim Mars once, and Jim was a author, journalist, wrote JFK, the book that the movie was based on. And big into UFOs and conspiracies and things, and I heard that he passed away, and I kind of smiled and thought, okay, now he knows, because he was just one giant bundle of questions until then. I thought, okay, now you know, but unfortunately, you can't tell me.
Well, that's one of the great freedoms that I have, is that I'm not worried about whether people understand me, because I know that in the moment of their death, when this veil is lifted, like you said, the wink of an eye, the blink of an eye, that's the length of a life. When that happens, they're going to find out. So I'm totally, if you don't understand me, or you're angry at me, or you don't like what I say, fine. I'm not going to try to argue any sort of philosophical or theological points with anybody, because
you can't.
You can't, and they're going to find out when they die anyway. So let's go have a beer instead. Let's have fun together.
You can't change somebody's politics in a conversation, nor can you change their religious beliefs in a conversation. And I don't get into those. I don't get into those conflicts anymore. I just, that's your opinion. That's really good. I appreciate you're passionate about your opinion. Let's move on. Yeah. Because I'm not going to convince you, and you're not going to convince me. But
same deal here.
We're all, it's kind of funny. Peter, what is your YouTube channel?
It's Peter Panagore, Panagore,
that was easy.
Peter Panagore, and I'm the only I'm one of maybe 7 Panagores in all of North America, so I'm pretty easy to find.
So Peter Panagore on YouTube. So I'm going to go over and subscribe to that.
Thank you. And I run a live meditation Mondays and Wednesdays at 8 a.m. on Eastern Standard Time on YouTube and Facebook. And I run this thing. I've started this thing called Not Church on Sunday mornings, where it's Not Church, a heretic mystic's perspective on the biblical writings, basically. And so I try to deconstruct and reconstruct through the lens of near-death experience. It's been going all right. I just started it a couple of weeks ago. COVID made me kick me into gear on that. And so I'm trying to provide venues for people to find their way back home again.
Not too quickly, though.
No. Well,
when they're ready.
Their time's coming whenever it comes. And from the other point of view, I didn't tell you lots of things that happened on the other side. But one of the things, it's all in the book. By the way, it's an Audible bestseller, and I've just signed a feature film contract with major Hollywood producers for a movie. But
For Heaven is Beautiful?
Yep. And
Sweet.
We're hard at work on that. One of the things I didn't say is that one of the reasons why I thought I could come back and endure here was that I understood how short life is, and so that my 21 years were literally a wink of my eye and length of time. And so I know that when I go back there again, all the suffering I will have endured here and the time I spent here will be nothing. Zero. Zippo. And so that's a great freedom that I have. It's a great after effect.
Wow, that is fascinating. It's the after effect of what you experienced is the ripple in the pond for other people. It goes out from you to others and touches so many other people's lives. You've written a series of books, or not another series, but you've written a couple of other books, Chicken Soup for the Veteran Soul, Stories to Stir the Pride and the Honor of Courage of Our Veterans, as well as 2 Minutes for God. Very, very interesting reading. I'm going to now have to poke around. I'm going to have to get the Amazons to send me a book now. And you can get those books via your website and also on Amazon and wherever books are sold. If you go to Peter's website, peterpanagore.love is his website, and it'll give you the links to a number of things, as well as his books and videos and interviews and other bits and pieces. Blog? Are you still active with your blog?
No, I was a blogger for Huffington Post, and Huffington Post about 2 or 3 years ago closed down all their blogs, and so I just stopped blogging. And but they're still all posted up there, and I do mostly little video clips on Facebook and YouTube, and I'm working on the movie, and I'm working on my book, and so all of my writing skills, my next book, all of my writing skills are going into those works at this point.
All your time in writing, and you're still obviously doing counseling because
still doing counseling.
Called you this morning. You were just coming out of a meeting. Again, thank you very much, Peter, for dropping by. I really appreciate this. Peter Panagore. Go to his website again. It's Peter Panagore. Just actually Google Peter Panagore. Panagore. Don't do that. Google Panagore. Reverend Peter Panagore. Thank you very much, sir, for dropping by.
James, so good to meet you. I had a fun with you. You're very easy to talk to, and I thank you for having me on your show.
Watching you while you sleep all alone.
All right, that's it. Let's roll. And hey. Let's be careful out there.
Far over the snow, what are those voices? They sing as they go. What are those voices? Look up for the mountain. Somebody hide, somebody better hide. On through the hill, like a pack of angry wolves on the trail. We are after you, dead or alive. We are out to get you, dead or alive. And forget your toes. If you're the one, better run away. Son, you are done. Throw your gun away. Here come the Mounties to get the man they're after now. Run through the hill like a pack of angry wolves on the trail. Dead or alive, we are out to get you, dead or alive. If you're the one, better run away. Son, you are done. Throw your gun away. Here come the Mounties to get the man they're after. No!